You wake up one morning thinking you know everything about Stranger Things Season 5. But what if I told you that the most heartbreaking death in the entire series might not be as final as you think? What if Eddie Munson, the metalhead hero who sacrificed everything to save Hawkins, could return not as the lovable dungeon master we remember, but as something far more sinister? Buckle up, because this theory is about to flip everything you thought you knew about Eddie's fate completely upside down. Before we dive into the twisted rabbit hole of how this could actually happen, let me paint you a picture of just how massive this revelation would be. We're not talking about some simple resurrection story here. We're talking about taking one of the most beloved characters in Stranger Things history and transforming him into potentially the most dangerous threat Hawkins has ever faced. This isn't just fan speculation either. There are actual clues scattered throughout the show that point to this possibility. And when you start connecting the dots, the picture becomes terrifyingly clear. Now, you might be thinking this sounds completely insane, and honestly, you're not wrong. But here's the thing about Stranger Things. The show has never shied away from taking beloved characters and putting them through absolute hell. Remember what happened to Will in Season 2? Or how about Eleven's entire character arc? The Duffer Brothers have a pattern of taking characters we love and pushing them to their absolute breaking point, often transforming them into something we barely recognize. Let's start with what we actually know about Eddie's death and why it opens the door for something much darker than a simple heroic sacrifice. When those demo bats tore into Eddie during the final battle, he didn't just die, he died in the Upside Down, a place where the normal rules of life and death don't exactly apply. Every single character who has spent significant time in that nightmare dimension has come back changed in some fundamental way. Will had his connection to the Mind Flayer. Eleven developed her psychic abilities after her encounters with the alternate dimension. Even Nancy experienced visions and connections that lingered long after her brief time there. Eddie spent his final moments bleeding out on upside-down soil, and that's not something you just walk away from, even in death. The Upside Down has a nasty habit of leaving its mark on everything it touches, and death might not be the clean ending we think it is when it happens in that twisted realm. Think about it. We've seen the Upside Down preserve things, twist them, and bring them back in corrupted forms. What if Eddie's death wasn't an ending, but a transformation? But here's where things get really interesting, and this is where the Dungeons & Dragons lore that the show loves to reference becomes absolutely crucial. Eddie wasn't just any dungeon master. He was obsessed with the mythology, the stories, and the complex relationships between heroes and villains in that world. One of the most famous tales in D&D lore involves a character called Cass the Bloody-Handed, a trusted lieutenant who eventually turned against his master, Vecna, using a sword that Vecna himself had created. Now pay attention to this next part because it's going to blow your mind. Vecna, the big bad of Season 4, has this pattern of creating his own worst enemies. In the D&D mythology, he's repeatedly undone by the very people he tries to corrupt or control. What if Eddie's heroic death wasn't actually a victory over Vecna, but the first step in Vecna's most twisted plan yet? What if Vecna knew that Eddie's sacrifice would create something even more dangerous than anything the Upside Down had produced before? Consider this. Eddie died fighting Demobats, creatures that are essentially extensions of Vecna's will. These aren't just random monsters. They're part of Vecna's hive mind, connected to his consciousness and carrying pieces of his dark influence. When they swarmed Eddie, they weren't just killing him. They were potentially infecting him with something far worse than death. The Upside Down doesn't just take lives, it corrupts souls. And Eddie's soul was marinated in that corruption during his final moments. The show has already established that strong emotional connections can transcend death in the Upside Down. Will's connection to his friends helped him survive when he was trapped there. Eleven's emotional bonds have repeatedly brought her back from the brink. But what happens when those same powerful emotions get twisted by the Upside Down's influence?
Eddie's love for his friends, his desire to protect them, his need to prove he wasn't a coward, all of those beautiful human emotions could become weapons in the wrong hands.
Here's the truly terrifying part. If Eddie comes back as a villain, he won't be some mindless monster like the Demogorgons or Demobats. He'll retain his intelligence, his knowledge of the group's weaknesses, and his understanding of how they think and operate. He knows Dustin's loyalty, Mike's impulsiveness, Lucas's protective instincts, and Nancy's determination. He understands their group dynamics better than any enemy they've ever faced because he was part of their inner circle. Imagine the psychological warfare potential here. A corrupted Eddie wouldn't need to rely on brute force or supernatural powers, though he'd probably have those too. He could manipulate the group's emotions, exploit their guilt over his death, and use their love for him against them. He could appear to them in moments of weakness, offering comfort while slowly leading them toward destruction. He knows exactly which buttons to push and which heartstrings to pull. The guilt factor alone would be devastating.
Dustin especially would be vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. The kid already blames himself for Eddie's death, and if a corrupted version of Eddie showed up claiming that his sacrifice was meaningless or that he's angry about being abandoned, it could absolutely destroy Dustin's psyche. The group would be fighting not just a powerful enemy, but their own grief, guilt, and love for someone they thought they'd lost forever. This setup also creates the perfect mirror to Vecna's own story. Vecna was once human, once had connections and relationships, and his transformation into a monster was gradual and rooted in his human experiences. If Eddie follows a similar path, it creates this beautiful and tragic parallel where the hero's journey gets corrupted into a villain's origin story.
But the most chilling possibility is that a villainous Eddie wouldn't see himself as the bad guy. He'd genuinely believe he was trying to save everyone from a worse fate.
That's the most insidious kind of villain, one who thinks they're the hero of their own story. Eddie could return convinced that the only way to truly protect Hawkins is to eliminate the threats permanently. And in his corrupted mind, that might mean his former friends who keep putting themselves in danger. Picture this nightmare scenario. Eddie shows up claiming he's found a way to end the upside-down threat forever, but his solution involves sacrifices that the group would never accept. Maybe he believes that closing the gates permanently requires specific people to stay behind. Or perhaps he's convinced that some of his friends are too connected to the Upside Down to ever truly be free. His twisted logic could lead him to conclude that killing them would be an act of mercy, saving them from a lifetime of being hunted by supernatural forces. The beauty of this villain arc is that it wouldn't require Eddie to completely abandon his core personality traits. He'd still be the guy who wants to protect the people he cares about, but his methods would be horrifyingly warped. He might still crack jokes, still reference D&D, still show genuine affection for his friends, all while systematically working to destroy them. That combination of familiar warmth and underlying menace would be absolutely devastating for both the characters and the audience.
Now, let's talk about the practical evidence that supports this theory, because there are way more hints than you might realize. First off, the show has been building toward this idea that death in the Upside Down isn't permanent. Barb disappeared there, and her body was preserved in some twisted, cocoon-like state. Will was kept alive in a similar condition. The Upside Down seems to have this weird relationship with life and death that we don't fully understand yet. Then there's the whole Cass connection that the show has been teasing since Eddie's introduction. The writers didn't accidentally make him obsessed with D&D lore. Every reference in this show is deliberate. When Eddie talks about Vecna during his campaign, he's not just setting up the season's villain, he's potentially foreshadowing his own transformation. The parallels are too perfect to ignore.
But here's something most people missed. Eddie's guitar scene wasn't just a heroic moment. When he played Master of Puppets to distract the Demobats, he was literally controlling creatures through music, just like how Vecna uses music and sound to manipulate his victims. That scene established Eddie as someone who can influence the creatures of the Upside Down, and that ability wouldn't necessarily disappear with death. The timeline works perfectly too. If Eddie's body has been slowly transforming in the Upside Down between seasons, he'd have had months or even years to develop new abilities and let the corruption take hold.
By the time season 5 rolls around, he could emerge as something far more powerful and dangerous than the scared metalhead who made that final stand. Think about the dramatic potential here. The group would have to face the impossible choice of fighting someone they love or letting him destroy everything they've worked to protect. Dustin would be completely torn apart. How do you fight the person you looked up to as a big brother? How do you accept that your hero has become the very thing you've been fighting against? The emotional stakes would be through the roof, because every confrontation would hurt. Unlike fighting faceless demogorgons or even Vecna himself, fighting Eddie would feel like betraying a friend with every single blow. The group would be constantly hoping to find some way to save him, to bring back the person they remember, even as he's actively trying to destroy them. And here's the kicker. What if saving Eddie requires one of the group to make the same sacrifice he made?
What if the only way to free him from the corruption is for someone else to take his place, to willingly let themselves be consumed by the darkness in order to pull him back into the light? That would create this beautiful, tragic cycle where heroic sacrifice becomes both the problem and the solution. The show could even play with the idea that Eddie is fighting the corruption internally, that there are moments where the real Eddie breaks through and tries to warn his friends or help them escape. Those glimpses of the person he used to be would make his villainous actions even more heartbreaking, because we know that somewhere inside that monster, Eddie Munson is screaming to get out. This whole scenario also sets up the perfect redemption arc for the final season. Eddie could start as a villain, terrorize the group for most of the season, and then, in the climactic moments, find a way to break free from the corruption just long enough to make one final, truly heroic sacrifice. It would give his character a complete journey, hero to victim, to villain, to redeemed hero, and it would pack an emotional punch that would leave audiences absolutely devastated.
The Duffer Brothers love their tragic heroes, and they love subverting expectations. Bringing Eddie back as a villain would accomplish both goals while creating some of the most emotionally complex storytelling the show has ever attempted. Plus, it would give Joseph Quinn the chance to show incredible range as an actor, playing both the beloved character fans remember and a twisted version that's terrifyingly different. But perhaps the most compelling reason this theory could be true is that it would force every character to confront their own capacity for darkness. So there you have it, the twisted, heartbreaking possibility that Eddie Munson's story isn't over, and his return could be the most devastating plot twist Stranger Things has ever delivered. From the D&D mythology that's been woven throughout the series to the corruption potential of dying in the Upside Down, every piece of evidence points toward a villain arc that would absolutely shatter our hearts, while blowing our minds.